New figures suggest more than 1/3 of young people are spending much higher proportions of their income on rent.
The Department for Housing say their new rental law will abolish no-fault evictions.
Landlords and tenants have had a bumpy ride in 2023, and looking ahead at 2024, there continues to be some challenging times, especially when you look at the Renters Reform Bill, expensive loans, but also the increased rent that's going to continue for this year. And if we look at Zoopla's report, it says the average rent for new lets have risen 9.7% since a year ago. Demand for rental homes is down by 11% on last year, but it's still a third higher than 5 years average. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 5 things that landlords and tenants should know for 2024. Make sure you stay tuned. So let's start off with the demand in the rental market, outside of the factors of supply. So of course, first up, you've got household bills, inflation, the cost of living, but also mortgage rates. Now, these are all relevant because especially when you look at those first-time buyers, they're staying put or at least on the fence, looking to see what's happening with those mortgage rates because let's face it, a lot of people are now priced out of the market. And until their financial circumstances change, they're going to continue to rent, where otherwise these properties and these units will go back into the rental market. Another thing is people coming back to the office. Now, of course, 2-3 years ago, there was a reverse of this. People going outside to the country, perhaps even to the coast. And right now, a lot of people, especially those young professionals who are continuing to live with mum and dad and making it more viable that way, a lot of those people are coming back to the office, either a willingness to come back or either their employers telling them, you know what, you have to come back to the city and work from the office. And another factor, of course, especially with those major cities that have universities, is students coming back to the cities, whether that's from other parts of the country or from abroad. And in London especially, those overseas students are really driving that demand, and especially those students who have a lot of money from mum and dad from overseas. So that race for space that we saw during the pandemic years, that has slightly flipped. And of course there are people with unique circumstances that can still have that luxury, I call it luxury if you see it that way, of moving outside of the country or to the coast and be able to work from there. Perhaps just coming to the office maybe a few times in the month. And if you're a landlord wanting to get regular updates on the legislation and the housing market, make sure you follow the link on the description below so you can register now for a free quarterly webinar. So what about the supply side of the rental market? Well, looking at the headlines, especially when it comes to landlords exiting the market, there is some truth on this, especially when it comes to those landlords who are strapped with cash, have a lot of their properties that is financed, and they're going to feel the pinch if they haven't done so already. So restructuring or perhaps just selling up. But the reality is that most of landlords that have a lot of units here in the UK, and especially here in London, they are landlords that own their property outright. So a lot of equity in the market. Now, the other thing is regulations. Of course, a lot of landlords not wanting to take on that burden, so much change in the regulations, and deciding, you know what, right now is the right time for me to just exit. And of course, for most landlords, it's all about the numbers, and it's just much more challenging to make those numbers work right now and make it profitable. So for those landlords that are making a good profit margin, very much staying into the market, otherwise they are out, and putting some further pressure in that low stock of supply in the rental market all across the UK. A very common question I get right now is it a buyer's market? Well, if we look at, according to Zoopla, the amount of properties sold in 2023 was just above 1 million, and house prices fell by 1.2% on average across the UK. The Bank of England hiked bank rates 5 times, mortgage rates peaked at 6.4% for 2-year fixed rates, and standard variable rates mortgages hit at 8.74%. At the start of 2023, it took 36 days on average to sell a home, but by April, that figure reduced to just 29 days. Today, it takes 38 days to sell a home, and that's for December. So what we saw in 2023 was the majority of buyers were cash buyers, and just trailing after that were first-time buyers. But in my experience, it was people that really had to move. Because of the mortgage rates, they really wanted to wait to see what happened in 2024. And of course, just after that, we have buy-to-let investors, especially when you look at those investors that depend on finance. What we are seeing at the beginning of 2024 is more of those first-time buyers that actually want to move, and they depend on finance, but because of those changes in mortgage rates, and we're going to continue to see that, we're seeing much more inquiries, viewings, and as a consequence, of course, offers. And the fact that the UK housing market is so much more active at the beginning of 2024 absolutely means you should hit that like button. It really helps me out in pushing more of these videos to people just like you. Rental increases across the UK, of course, we've seen a massive spike, especially in London, anywhere between 20 to 30% over the course of the last 3 years, around about 10% over the course of 2023. 2024, we continue to see an increase, however, it's not going to be in those double digits, very unlikely, more like single digits. Zoopla says it's going to be around 2%, I'll say probably around about 4% or thereabouts. And it's also regional. I think London has increased so much, there's not really much room. Especially when we look at renters and the cost of living, inflation, utility bills and everything else. Something to be said about wages. Wages in some sectors have already also increased, so that's also keeping up pace, but not in all sectors. But I think we've seen the peak in London at least. And there's going to be other regions that perhaps are going to be cheaper. And I think there's going to be more of a rental increase in those other regions. We're going to be sharing much more data when it comes to regions, rental prices, investments. So make sure you subscribe so you keep up to date. And as I take out my crystal ball, at least looking at leading indicators and tell you where the market is going, there is some things that got to point out, especially when it comes to the instability in the Middle East. Inflation, of course, which the target's around about 2%. Will we get that? Not too sure, but something to look out for. And of course, that we don't have something major like the next pandemic coming along in 2024. Legislation, of course, we have talked about the Renters Reform Bill. If you want to dive deep into that, you can watch our other videos. But an overview of it and the headlines, of course, Section 21 has been delayed. We do have those fixed term tenancy that very likely at some point when these laws are implemented are going to be abolished. So we are going to look at whereby tenants can just give a 2-month notice, whereby all tenancy will become a periodic tenancy. Other changes proposed are going to be regulations that are going to determine how often rents can be increased, and tenants will be able to dispute this, of course. A new ombudsman for landlords that's going to be brought in to resolve issues between landlords and tenants without the need of taking it to court. I personally agree with this. Well, at the moment, agents by law have to have the ombudsman, and it just doesn't seem right that if a tenant goes directly to a landlord, that they can just bypass this and the tenant won't have the same rights or the same ability to be able to take it to a ombudsman. So I totally agree with this. And when it comes to pets, finally, tenants are going to have that right to request pets in the property, with landlords no longer allowed to issue any bans on animals whatsoever. Included in the rental reform bills is making it illegal for those blanket bans. So landlords or agents can no longer say, well, we won't take family, children, or people on benefits. That's now going to be illegal if this law passes, of course. The plans to apply decent home standard to the rental sector for the very first time, and council is going to be given enforcement powers to ensure landlords adhere to new standards. And the biggest thing within this context is that landlords who fail to adhere to these are going to face fines of up to £30,000. So legislation moves us nicely into the election, which very likely going to have one in 2024. Why is that important to landlords and renters? Well, how these legislation is going to be implemented is going to be very important depending on what party is going to be in place. In fact, it's going to be important what leader is going to be in place, because you can have the current government in place, the Conservative win the elections, and yet the new leader may want to review this and make some changes. Which brings the next question. Are they going to pass these laws before the election to win votes? And who's going to be pushing for what? Meaning, tenants at least seem to be leaning more towards Labour because Labour seems to be more favourable for tenants. So a little tricky one. Tenants, landlords, who are they voting for? Who's going to be more convenient? But it seems to me, whichever party, no one's going to get exactly what they want, especially in the rental sector. It will be interesting to see what they have in store for the spring budget in March, especially for the housing sector, especially after calls for the stamp duty reform and help for first-time buyers was ignored in 2023. It would be great to see something in the spring budget with regards to inheritance tax. It would definitely get the housing stock moving. A lot of homeowners who are willing to move but just won't move because of the tax issues. And when it comes to first-time buyers, it will also be amazing to see the government helping, especially with these young people who are unable to buy properties. They're just being priced out of the market, especially with the mortgage rate. And what many in the housing industry would like to see is dividend tax and capital gains tax threshold cuts halted. Halting plans to slash the thresholds of dividends and tax capital gains tax would relieve pressure on a lot of investors and entrepreneurs. And I'm just curious whether you're a landlord or a renter. Legislation, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Leave me a comment below. And last and certainly not least, we go on to mortgage rates. By the time of recording this video, we're getting some positive news. We get first-time buyers being able to get a fixed 5-year rate at around about 4%, which is something we haven't seen in a very long time. When it comes to buy-to-let investment, around about 6%, of course not ideally what they like, but it's certainly going in the right direction. We are seeing this year those first-time buyers that want to move instead of having to move, which was a lot what we were seeing last year. Kind of, we can't wait, and we're just going to take the hit of the very high mortgage rates. Right now, people actually wanting to move. We're getting a lot of inquiries, a lot of viewings, and of course, as a consequence of that, getting offers. So that's going to get first-time buyers moving, which means more stock in the rental market. And if you have any challenges property related, feel free to book an appointment with me. You have direct access to my calendar on the description below.